This week, the Justice Department announced the decision to free a man named Jonathan Pollard, a former Navy officer who was convicted of passing American secrets to the Israeli government. He pleaded guilty to that back in 1987 and was sentenced to life in prison, but will now walk free on November 20th. The move is seen as just the latest by the Obama administration to appease Israel in wake of reaching an historic agreement with Iran concerning its nuclear program. It's a deal Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described as a, quote, threat to Israel's existence. The U.S. has also announced it will boost its military aid to the country by the tune of $1.5 billion annually in order to ease tensions. All of this as a new report out by Human Rights Watch has confirmed that Israeli security forces routinely abuse Palestinian children, subjecting them to unlawful detentions, beatings, and interrogations. Even just this afternoon, the Israeli government approved an additional 300 illegal settlements to be built by Jewish settlers in the occupied territory of the West Bank.
To a new documentary, which you also are in. That documentary is premiering in theaters today. It's called Long Distance Revolutionary, A Journey with Mumia Abu-Jamal. In 1982, Mumia Abu-Jamal was sentenced to die for killing Philadelphia police officer Daniel Faulkner. He's always maintained his innocence as perhaps America's most famous prisoner. In 2011, an appeals court upheld his conviction, but also vacated his death sentence. It found jurors were given confusing instructions. When prosecutors said they would no longer pursue the death penalty, Mumia Abu-Jamal was transferred into the general prison population. In a moment, we're going to play an excerpt from the film, but first we're joined by Mumia Abu-Jamal himself from prison in Pennsylvania, not SCI Green, where he was on death row, but in, well, Mumia, welcome to Democracy Now! Why don't you tell us where you are?
Good morning. I'm in the eastern side of Pennsylvania for the first time in a quarter of a century, actually more. It's called Mahanoy. Don't ask me what it means. I have no idea. But it's not far from Philadelphia and pretty close to New York City.
Can you tell us what it means to no longer be on death row?
Well, I could, but I'd be lying because I call this slow death row. Life in Pennsylvania means life. Pennsylvania has one of the largest life populations of any state in the United States. It had the distinction of having the absolute highest number of juvenile lifers of any state in the United States, indeed of any jurisdiction in the world. So that should give you some sense.
Juan, if you're still there, if you'd like to ask Mumia Abu-Jamal a question.
Well, Mumia, I know that over the years, it's been a while since we've talked, but over the years, this enormous movement has developed around the world demanding your freedom and insisting on the unjust nature of the trial that occurred many years ago in your case. Your reflections on this enormous movement that has developed and its role in terms of the prison industrial complex in general, in your case in particular.
Well, I think it is the essence of a grassroots movement because it came from the bottom, not from the top. These were people who, many of whom I knew in freedom and who would not let me go and would not leave me alone and held on to me despite every challenge. At the core, of course, are people that I fell in love with many years ago, known as the MOVE organization. And so from several members of the MOVE organization, PAM Africa, Ramona Africa, they built around them a grassroots organization that is, in many ways, unprecedented in organizing. You know, I've studied movements. I've been in movements all my life. I've, written a few history books about this stuff. But to be in the core of it and see it is another thing, and it's nothing less than remarkable. And it continues to grow, to build, and to demand an end to mass incarceration, an end to what I've called slow death row, and into solitary confinement. It's a vibrant movement. Like every movement, it ebbs, it flows. But to be perfectly honest, it's still with us. And anyone who denies that either is blind or a fool.
Mumia, are you still appealing your case?
Yes. I have always appealed. I have always fought, and there's no reason to not do so now. In this point in time, we are kind of in an interim because we had kind of a shadow sentencing with no presence, no arguments, no briefs, no anything. We kind of got an order one day saying, you're a lifer. That isn't what the rules provide. And so there's been certainly resistance on that score. But, anyone who knows anything about the case, anyone who's read the Amnesty International report on the case knows that my case is rife with new rules all the time. So this is just new rules.
Last week, Mumia Abu-Jamal, did you witness the inauguration, the second inauguration of President Obama? And I'm wondering your thoughts.
I did indeed. It was with a mixture of sadness in some respects, sadness at lost opportunities, but also a kind of wonder. I mean, you have to admit that Barack Hussein Obama is one of the most talented politicians and skillful political forces this country's ever seen. Now, it is also true that that is so largely because of certain constituencies in this country that pushed that candidacy. Sadness because many of the hopes of many of those constituencies have been dashed. That's the nature of politics in many ways. You run one way and you rule another. And someone, I think it was Mario Cuomo, said that you run in poetry, but you govern in prose.
Mumia, as you are off of death row, or as you call it, slow death row, what is it like to be there with other people? We wanted to speak to you yesterday on the phone, but you had an appointment at the law library, which you didn't want to miss. Talk about your life behind bars.
Well, let me talk about the men that are around me. It may not surprise you that a lot of these guys are black men. A lot of them are very old black men. I remember and still feel the shock of seeing a line of men in wheelchair being rolled to chow. I stopped because you saw these wheelchairs coming out of the mist. I've never seen anything like that. But from this great expanse of age, you can see very, very young men who don't even shave. So you can see the span of black manhood from teenagers, literally teenagers, to men in their 60s and 70s and beyond. And it is a stunning thing to see. And the size, there must be 2,200 men in this population, but the size is just stunning. And to be walking around in the midst of 400, 500 men is an experience that I had to relearn because I had surely forgotten it.
You're writing a book, yet another book in prison. You've written a number of them.
Yes. This is my second with a co-author, Steve Vittoria, the great filmmaker.
Who is joining us right here in the studio right now.
We are, shall we say, Zenian historians. So we're looking at the world, looking at the empire through our own eyes, and writing out of not just our research, although the research is extensive. We're writing out of our hearts and out of our experiences. And in the spirit of Howard Zen, it is from below, deep, deep below.
This call is from the State Correctional Institution at Mahanoy and is subject to monitoring and recording.
But I assure you, we will present something richer than many people have ever seen before. It is a labor of historical lust and great fun.
What are you calling the book?
Murder Incorporated.
Why that title?
Well, it comes from LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who, upon the assassination of John F. Kennedy, when he acceded to the presidency and he began getting reports about what was happening in Central America, he was famously quoted as saying, "My God, we're running a goddamn Murder Incorporated down here." And indeed they were.
I know that your line is going to be cut off in a minute, and I was wondering what message do you have to people outside the bars right now?
Well, increasingly, that space has expanded because if you look inside the bars, you're looking at millions of men and women and juveniles, as I noted before. But even beyond that, I mean, how free are we today, those who claim to be non-prisoners? Your computers are being read by others in government. Your letters, your phone calls are being intercepted. We live now in a national security state where the United States is fast becoming one of the biggest open-air prisons on earth. I mean, we can speak about freedom, and the United States has a long and distinguished
60 seconds remaining.
Long and distinguished history of talking about freedom. But have we exampled freedom? And I think the answer should be very clear. We have not. And we're becoming a less free nation every day. And I think people should rise up, and I think they should organize, and I think, frankly, they should raise hell. You know, if you don't want to join our movement, join some movement. But damn it, do something, because we are in an age that we may never be able to capture again.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
So, Mumia, if the widow of Daniel Faulkner, the prisoner, the police officer who you were convicted of killing, is listening, what do you have to say to her?
That the struggle for justice and freedom did not end on December 9th, 1981. It began then. And she should join us, because our movement is growing.
Mumia, I want to thank you for being with us. Mumia Abu-Jamal just cut off at SCI Mahanoy in Pennsylvania, the prison where he now resides. He was on death row in Pennsylvania for 29 years, now is in prison for life. Award-winning journalist, chronicles the human condition. When we come back, we're joined by two people who have made a film about his life, long-distance revolutionary. Stay with us. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.
The politics of denunciation. When was the last time you saw a politician asked to denounce a religious leader with whom he or she was associated? For generations, we've seen a succession of presidents from both political parties under the wing of the Reverend Billy Graham. Historians have recently reported that Graham and his Oval Office acolytes have spoken in racist and xenophobic terms about both blacks and Jews. The Reverend Graham was lionized as the personal spiritual advisor to presidents in times of war and peace. Neither he nor his presidential prayer pals have ever been damned or denounced for profoundly racist speech in the ears of the powerful. Now, as a black man begins to climb the greased pole of American political power, he is asked to either defend or denounce a man whom he has known and admired for a generation. Barack Obama opted for the latter. He has all but jettisoned the Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright from the close circle to the cold periphery of the political realm. Whence comes this demand for denunciation? If we're honest, it arises from a deep white fear that demands of black people a higher standard than that of their own. For what reason was Jeremiah Wright been jettisoned, if not for his proud, open blackness? Reverend Wright is an advocate of black liberation theology, a school of black religious thought that sees the hand of God in the liberation of black people from bondage. White Americans are so used to hearing blacks speak with quiet and pacific tones that when a man expresses himself fully, as did Reverend Wright, they are quite frankly frightened. What do they fear? That blacks will dare remember? Through the corporate media talking heads, they demanded that Obama distance himself from that scary, black, uppity preacher, and do it fast. Yowza, boss. The politics of denunciation is ultimately the politics of betrayal. It asks, no, it demands that the candidate denounce those whom the white nation opposes. If they don't, then they're presumed to be a supporter of that person or ideology. Meanwhile, white conservative preachers can say virtually anything, and calls for denunciations are swallowed into silence. Former presidential candidate and Republican supporter Reverend Pat Robertson called for the killing of a foreign head of state. I speak here of Venezuela's Hugo Chavez. Did the White House denounce this prominent religious supporter? Not to my knowledge. In fact, it would be rather difficult given the current regime's failed coup d'etat against him. But Barack, the son of a continental African, cannot be seen calling for black liberation, for he seeks not to become leader of the black nation, but the world's leading white nation. Once again, blacks and their deep indigenous concerns are pushed to the periphery. Their free expression ain't free, for there is a cost. When I saw his latest diss of the Reverend Dr. Wright, I thought of a question posed in the Bible, in the words of Jesus of Nazareth, speaking to his disciples. It's in Matthew 16:26. For what is a man profited, if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? From death row, this is Mumia Abu-Jamal. These commentaries are produced by Noel Hanrahan for Prison Radio.
Were there no Israel, America would have to invent one. We'd have to invent one. Because Ron is right. You protect our interests like we protect yours. So let's get something straight. In this moment of some disagreement occasionally between our governments, I want to set the record straight on one thing. No president has ever done more to support Israel's security than President Barack Obama. Just look at the facts. Each time a rocket is rained down from Gaza, President Obama stands up before the world and defends Israel's right to defend itself like any other nation. Under President Obama, with the United States Congress, America's provided $20 billion in military assistance to Israel and the cutting-edge weaponry needed to maintain the qualitative advantage against any potential opponent. You all know the stories of the Iron Dome. What you may not know is that next year we will deliver to Israel the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, our finest, making Israel the only country in the Middle East with a fifth-generation aircraft. No other. And we continue to discuss, as the Israeli military here and the intelligence communities will tell you in Israel as well as here, we continue to discuss what more must be done in the near term and the long term to continue to strengthen Israel so she can maintain that edge.
A Palestinian state's a high priority for me and my administration. A viable state, a state that doesn't look like Swiss cheese, a state that provides hope.
And it is I think, a useful foundation to help solve a long-standing problem. I do believe there will be a Palestinian state. I feel comfortable in saying that my decision to promote a Palestinian state, being the first president to do so, was the right thing for peace for the Palestinians, right thing for peace for the Israelis.
I want to switch gears before the end of the show and go back to Cuba. Massive news this week about the beginning of normalization of relations. And I wanted to ask you about the issue of Assata Shakur. Authorities in New Jersey have said they hope a historic warming of ties between the U.S. and Cuba will help them capture and imprison Black Panther Assata Shakur. In a statement, State Police Superintendent Colonel Rick Fuentes said, "We view any changes in relations with Cuba as an opportunity to bring her back to the United States to finish her sentence for the murder of a New Jersey state trooper in 1973. The encounter left both the officer and a fellow Black Panther, Zaid Malik Shakur, dead. Assata Shakur has said she was shot by police with both arms in the air and then again from the back. She was sentenced to life in prison, managed to escape, fled to Cuba, where she's lived since 1984. I got to see her there a few years later. In 1998, Democracy Now! Aired Assata Shakur reading an open letter to Pope John Paul II during his trip to Cuba. She wrote the message after New Jersey state troopers sent the Pope a letter asking him to call for her extradition.
I later joined the Black Panther Party, an organization that was targeted by the COINTELPRO program, a program that was set up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to eliminate all political opposition to the U.S. government's policies, to destroy the Black liberation movement in the United States, to discredit activists, and to eliminate potential leaders.
That was Assata Shakur reading an open letter to, at the time, Pope John Paul II. Martin Garbus, what will happen to Assata Shakur?
She will not be returned. Fidel Castro, when she came there, said that she would be allowed to stay in Cuba indefinitely. I had a meeting about a month ago with 5 Congress people, including Representative Barbara Lee, and they were also absolutely clear that they would oppose any attempts on the United States to succeed that would get Assata Shakur back. So to me, it's absolutely clear she's not coming back.
Black Panther Sundiata Kohli has been ordered released on parole. State New Jersey appeals court in New Jersey after more than 4 decades in prison, but New Jersey has appealed, so he's remaining in prison. The significance of this, Michael Ratner.
New Jersey has been outrageous about these cases. I mean, think about Assata's case. I mean, think about driving while black in New Jersey. Think about what's happened from Ferguson to Garner in New York. And I ask you, what do we think about what happened to Assata? And I agree with Marty, there is 100% chance that she will not be forced out of Cuba, 100%. I don't even question it. But of course you see New Jersey. They've raised the reward on her to $10 million. The FBI put her on the most wanted list, etc. So they're clearly after her, but I'm completely confident, as Marty is, that the Cubans will not have her extradited to the United States.
We will. If Menendez is indicted, that'll be helpful.
What? I'm sorry.
We'll link to our pieces. What did you say?
If Menendez is indicted, that will be helpful.
We'll link to our pieces on Assata Shakur at democracynow.org. That does it for our show. Michael Ratner, thanks so much for joining us, President Emeritus of the Center for Constitutional Rights and Chair of the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. As well, Martin Garbus, thanks so much for being with us, leading attorney in this country. That does it for the broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Armate, Nermin Sheikh, Steve Martinez, Semal Kapani Masood, Robbie Karen, Dina Guzder, Amy Littlefield. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our website's Democracy.
What's the deficit? Take a look at it. About half the deficit is military spending, which is going up under Obama. In fact, it's the most military spending of any president in his first term.
Obama and Black History Month 2015. As the Obama administration winds down, what is its relationship to Black History Month 2015? Of course, the election of an African American was indeed an historic event, and history books will well record this fact. But it was also an attempt by the Democratic Party to lock in a constituency that would fuel its political ascendancy for generations. In symbol, the election of President Barack Obama was a shock to the system. In substance, it was a lot less so. For beside the symbol stood a reality that Black life was under siege. In 2014, summer broke with Black protests from coast to coast, led by youth, young people who knew in their heart of hearts that the White House could not protect them from a peculiar American practice of police terrorism. When cops could harass, intimidate, beat, choke, kick, stomp, and kill kids, boys, and men with perfect impunity. Symbol, shining and bright, met substance of blood and tears, and one shattered the other. Tens of thousands stormed the streets in over 200 cities to howl at injustice and to demand now, finally, justice. For them, Ferguson became their Selma, and they faced guns and automatic weapons with courage and fury. Symbols are powerful things, yes, but reality is more powerful still. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia Abu-Jamal. These commentaries are recorded by Noel Hanrahan of Prison Radio.
About 46 million Americans receive food stamps from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP program. About 4.7 million of them are physically able to work and have no dependents. And about 1 million of them are about to lose their food stamps. That's because the government says the economy is doing just fine now, so these people should just go back to work and earn enough money to feed themselves from now on. The federal rule is that if you are an able-bodied adult with no dependents, you can only get 3 months of food stamps in any 3-year period, unless you meet a bunch of other criteria. That limiting rule was put in place under none other than President Bill Clinton, that guy who cares so much about the little guy. However, once the economy crashed hard in 2007, states were allowed to waive that rule and allow people to get more food stamps since everyone was having such a hard time. But right now, 22 states are not renewing that waiver. The rule goes back in place, which means about 1 million people are about to lose their food stamps. Why? Because the economy is doing so great right now, right? And so everyone should be able to feed themselves. Let's make people who can work just go out and get a job already and stop being a drag on our tax dollars. We'll save so much money not supporting these suckers, right? Well, let's take a look at the numbers for some perspective. The average amount of money people get in food stamps is $164 a month. Times 3 months over 3 years, that's just about $500 in 3 years. So if we take away 1 million people's stamps, even for just another 3 months, that's almost $500 million in savings. That sounds like a lot, right? Except when you hear that the U.S. is considering giving 10 times that every year for 10 years to Israel in defense aid. We give them $3 billion a year now, and we're considering upping that to $5 billion a year from 2017 to 2027. Or when you hear that the government has spent about $5 billion on democracy-building programs in Ukraine and hundreds of other countries wherever we want influence. So the savings the government will see from taking away 1 million people's food stamps is 1/10 of so many other line items in the budget spread out over 3 years. It is fractional what our country's poorest people get from our tax dollars to feed themselves. And this is what we will save. And yet this is what's being cut. Because apparently, in America, we'd rather feed our global influence than the poor. Tonight, let's talk about that.
Everywhere but today, Zionism is no longer as powerful as it was in America. It's being questioned everywhere and attacked all the time. It's weaker today than it was then. I remember in our African community, they even formed a committee called, Blacks in Support of Israel Committee, BASIC. Andrew Young was a member of it. Oh yes, all of them. The names are there. History doesn't cover anything. In the African community, even now when we spoke against Zionism, they put others to confuse us. Even Martin Luther King himself was confused on this issue. When we attacked Israel, he said any attack on Israel, this is a quote, any attack on Israel, no matter how you camouflage it, is an attack on Semitism, is anti-Semitic.
The whole world must see that Israel must exist and has a right to exist and is one of the great outposts of democracy in the world.
You want apples or anything? She was incredible. She went to Burma. Yeah, we are organizing all across America events this weekend because of the cuts in food stamps. And a lot of the people that eat with us, they depend on us for meals because the food stamps already were not stretching for the entire month. And now to take off 5% more, that's outrageous. And then the other concern we have is there's talk now of cutting it even more. Oh, to drop? Yeah.
There you go.
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They'd send some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. Yeah. I'm a field Negro.